Good evening and welcome to Resistance TV. It's Wednesday, the 27th of September, and I'm your host for this evening, Sian. I'm just standing in for Chris Williamson while he's away this week. So tonight we're going to be talking about net zero, and we had a recent communication from the Prime Minister last week where he talked about changing net zero and delaying it for 10 years. So tonight we're going to be talking to Peter Ford. His Excellency was a previous diplomat and he was the British ambassador to Syria and Bahrain. So we're very pleased to have Peter with us, and hopefully later on we'll be joined by Piers Corbyn, who is the brother of Jeremy Corbyn. He was awarded a first-class BSc degree in physics, and he's also graduated with a master's in astrophysics. So he's a very smart man, and he's been talking about net zero and the climate and weather for many years now. So I'd first of all like to welcome onto the platform is Peter. Good evening, Peter. How are you this evening?
Good evening, Sian. I'm delighted to be with you on Resistance TV. I feel I am part of the resistance. Much of the time I've been underground, but now I'm surfacing and all systems go.
Okay, so I just want to first of all talk about a proposal that you made to the Workers' Party of Britain, and it was to do with a referendum for net zero. I've got the let me just bear with me a second. I'll see if I can get this up on screen. Okay, so hopefully the audience can see that. So we have the net zero referendum. So I'm just going to read this out and then we'll have a chat about why you felt it was necessary to propose this motion. So so the why is this been proposed? It's an idea whose time has come. Labour and Tory alike have failed to speak up for the millions of workers and businesses who have concerns. Many proposals have been antisocial, work harming and unpractical. Costly net zero measures come at a time when millions are going without life's essentials. How would it work? Simple. The resolution to be put to the vote would be this: the Climate Act of 2008, as amended in 2019, committing the government to achieving net zero by 2050, should be maintained. Do you agree? It is not a referendum on net zero itself or even the target of 2050 for achieving it. It is not remotely near climate denial. So why support us? Millions think net zero is going too far, too fast. Let's open up the debate on protecting workers' jobs, rights and freedoms. The main political parties are all varying shades of green. They offer no real choice. They all want net zero on the unrealistic timescale of 2050. The referendum gives you a chance to say no to the political establishment. But what about the climate emergency? We all agree on the urgent need for clean water, fresh air, and the protection of the environment and animals. We need a debate across society on how we go about this. Sustainable solutions begin with social measures, better public transport, support for families and business, not LTNs, lithium mines, or corporate greenwashing. The referendum gives voters a chance to endorse Theresa May's 2019 decision to make the 2050 targets a legal obligation. The referendum gives industry the space to raise openly concerns over the durability and performance of new green products and building materials. The failure to manage these risks threaten new tragedies like Grenfell. Following a snap survey of our supporters on Telegram and social media, a fair cross-section agree it would be good for the Workers' Party of Britain to promote the idea of a referendum on net zero. This was taken to and discussed in full at the Party National Members Council on Tuesday, the 25th of July. Our draft proposal was discussed by the National Members Committee and unanimously agreed. The objective is to encourage a proper two-sided discussion of the issues and pursue our core aim of fairness for working people. Now, Peter, why did you think it was necessary to bring that to a motion?
Well, the politicians can't be trusted. Even when they say they want to go slow or slower on net zero, they speak with a forked tongue. They certainly can't be trusted to have the willpower or possibly even the capacity to be able to change the legislation. And changing the legislation is absolutely crucial because this country is recklessly committed by law to deliver these series of targets for achieving net zero by 2050. Governments can be hauled before judges if they fail to meet these targets, and there are a series of complex interim targets. So even if a sensible government, some hope we have of that, but even if we had a sensible government, their hands would be tied. They could not. They would be prevented by law from being sensible about net zero. And there's no hope that left to their own devices, they will call for a referendum. They will have to be forced to accept a referendum. Does this remind you about something else big that happened a few years ago? Brexit? Yes. Yeah. It is exactly the same. The structure of the situation is the same. The people want to put an end to a reckless enterprise, whether it was an ever closer union of Europe or an ever closer approach to economic suicide. And the people must have their say. You can't leave it to the politicians. And as happened with Brexit, why did the politicians agree to a referendum when all the main parties were against having a referendum? Well, they did it because of Nigel Farage invented a new party, the Brexit Party, that threatened to split the Tories. We must follow a similar, not identical, but follow a similar strategy with our referendum. We need to galvanize public opinion and present the referendum in the end as the Tories' only hope of ever being re-elected. So the idea is to force Sunak to put a referendum into the Tory manifesto. It will be his last desperate hope of being thrown out by Starmer. And we know that if Starmer gets in, then workers can kiss goodbye to their gas boilers, to their petrol cars. They're going to be poorer, colder, and more miserable. So the referendum is the way forward.
What did you watch the Prime Minister's speech on net zero this week, Peter? What did you think of it?
Superficially, it sounded pleasing. Here he was recognizing that ordinary people were going to suffer the way things were going, and this had to be the brakes applied. And so he delayed two key targets put back by 5 years, the target of going all electric for sales of new cars, and 5 years back to 2035 for being able to buy a new gas boiler. Well, it's only 5 years, it's only a stay of execution. And in the meanwhile, things are happening that make it meaningless. Just today, I read that the government are applying pressure to the gas to boiler manufacturers, more pressure to bring in heat pumps and not sell gas boilers. so that
Well, we'll come back to that in a second, Peter. I'm just going to play for those people who are watching. They may not have seen the Prime Minister's speech, so I'm just going to play a few clips of that. And the Prime Minister does talk about the heat pumps, and he does talk about electric cars, which is quite interesting.
Well,
So
first,
let's have a look at this
we need
video.
to
I
change
hope
the
it's
debate.
let's just let me just get this set up.
Do that.
Okay.
What is our new approach to achieving net zero? Well, first, we need to change the debate. We're stuck between two extremes. Those who want to abandon net zero altogether because the costs are too high, the burden's too great, or in some cases, they don't accept the overwhelming evidence for climate change at all. And then there are others who argue with an ideological zeal, we must move even faster and go even further, no matter the cost or disruption to people's lives, and regardless of how much quicker we're already moving than any other country. Both extremes are wrong. Both fail to reckon with the reality of the situation. Yes, net zero is going to be hard and will require us to change. But in a democracy, we must also be able to scrutinise and debate those changes, many of which are hidden in plain sight, in a realistic manner.
I'm just going to pause it there, Peter, because he says that we need to be able to debate this. As far as I'm concerned, you know, for us, the general public of Britain, there has been no debate on net zero. We've not had a say in net zero or the goals that they've put forward. All of this has been taken out of our hands, hasn't it?
exactly, we haven't had a say. Among the main political parties, you can have green, greener, or greenest. Well, I want brown, like lots of other people. You can't have brown. That's not on the agenda of the establishment. That's how we have to try to bypass this green monopoly on power by producing our own people power with a referendum. People power is the only way we can beat or stand a chance of beating the establishment, as happened with Brexit. In the 2017 election that Jeremy Corbyn almost won, the Tories were promising in their manifesto nothing about more net zero. In fact, they said they were going to allow fracking. That was a lie.
That's right, they did, yes.
That was a lie. They said nothing about tightening up the targets for net zero. No, we've been taken into all this, not just on a false prospectus. We didn't have a prospectus at all.
That's right. Well, let's carry on for a little bit now. So that's the first sort of part of the weasel words that jumped out at me.
This debate needs more clarity, not more emotion. The test should be, do we have the fairest credible path to reach net zero by 2050 in a way that brings people with us? Since I've become Prime Minister, I've examined our plans, and I don't think they meet that test. We seem to have defaulted to an approach which will impose unacceptable costs on hard-pressed British families, costs that no one was ever really told about, and which may not actually be necessary to deliver the emissions reduction that we need.
I think I agree with him there, Peter. Do you agree with that statement?
Yes, up to that point, no one really could argue with that, but the devil is in the detail.
Absolutely, and that's detail that he's not given us in this speech. Apparently, it's to come, but whether we'll actually hear about what's to come or whether it'll be hidden from us is another question.
And why am I confident in saying that? Because over the last decade or more, we've massively over-delivered on every one of our carbon budgets. Despite continuous predictions, we'd missed them. We've seen rapid technological advances, which have made things like renewables far cheaper. Just consider offshore wind, where costs have fallen by 70% more than we projected in 2016. And people are increasingly choosing to go green. Look at how demand for electric vehicles has consistently outstripped forecasts. Now, given all these things, I'm confident that we can adopt a more pragmatic, proportionate, and realistic approach to meeting net zero that eases the burdens on working people. And that's the second part of our new approach.
So how are we going to
Now,
do
I'm not
it,
saying
Rishi?
there will be no hard choices, and nor am I abandoning any of our targets and commitments. I am unequivocal that we will meet our international agreements, including the critical promises in Paris and Glasgow to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees.
Peter, have you got anything to? I was hoping Piers would be on by now, because I'm sure he would have to say have something to say about this 1.5 degrees. Where has this 1.5 degrees come from? There's been agreements signed in Paris, and I assume when he says Glasgow, it's the COP summit that he's talking about, and they've signed agreements that they will lower the global warming by 1.5 degrees. Where does that come from?
It was plucked from the air. It was plucked from the air. It wasn't based on any serious science. It was based on modeling, which is notoriously poor as a way of doing science. Garbage into the model, garbage out.
Well, we saw that during the pandemic, didn't we?
Exactly. The reality, I saw the figure just today, for over the last 25 years, the temperature, the average temperature in the world has risen by less than 0.5%. So even talking about 1.5% is nonsense. It's not going to happen. In any case, world temperature history teaches us fluctuates. It's nothing to worry about. It goes up and down because of the oscillation of the movement of the Earth vis-a-vis the sun, ocean currents, very, very important. Natural variations, cyclical, periodic. There is no reason to be terrified by the scaremongering. But can I just go back on a point of detail about what Sunak was saying there,
Yeah.
promising to ease the burden on ordinary people because we're already meeting our targets. We're so successful selling electric cars. Well, who's buying these electric cars? Not ordinary folk, because we can't afford them. 75% of new sales of electric cars are company cars, because they can afford it. Ordinary folk can't. A company can afford it. Why? Because they can pass on the cost to us, to you and me, and all the people watching. It's not the company that pays it, because they can pass it on. We can't pass it on when we buy an electric car. The buck stops with us, as does all this promised investment. When they say investment in new technologies, they don't mean that companies are going to invest this money. No, it's government money. In other words, our money. This is going to be this development of new technology is going to be a massive steal from theft from the ordinary public to rich capitalists. But I interrupted.
And of course, it's going to cost thousands of pounds per household, isn't it? I can't remember the figure that was put on it, but it's going to cost us thousands of pounds per household to meet the government's targets, not something that we've actually voted for. I'm just going to fast forward this slightly to his next point.
The single biggest commitment of its kind the UK has ever made. But we can do all of this in a fairer, better way. And today I can set out details of what our new approach will mean for people. That starts with electric vehicles. We're working hard to make the UK a world leader. I'm proud that we've already attracted billions of new investments from companies like Tata's Jaguar Land Rover Gigafactory. And I expect that by 2030, the vast majority of cars sold will be electric. Why? Because the costs are reducing, the range is improving, the charging infrastructure is growing. People are already choosing electric vehicles to such an extent that we're registering a new one every 60 seconds. But I also think that, at least for now, it should be you, the consumer, that makes that choice, not government forcing you to do it.
Okay, so I think that reinforces the point that you just made, Peter, about electric vehicles. And he says that the government shouldn't be forcing us to do it. It should be our choice. But like you say, it's mainly company cars. It's mainly people who have company cars that are able to afford to have electric vehicles. But there are other setbacks with electric vehicles, isn't there? You know, they say they want electric vehicles to achieve less carbon. Now, I know that in the UK, we're only responsible for less than 1% of carbon within the Earth's atmosphere. So it's a very, very little that we're responsible for here in Britain. Our industry is pretty clean, really, in comparison to other countries and continents. But when it comes to electrical vehicles, have we got the necessary electric grid and resources to be able to charge all these electric vehicles? Because this electricity has to come from somewhere. And we know that there's very little of our electricity is generated by hydropower or by wind power. When I looked at the Ofgem report, I think it was about 3% of our electricity comes from hydro and wind. The majority of our electricity comes from nuclear power stations and North Sea gas and oil. And we get very, very little oil and gas imported into it. We do import some, but very little from other countries. And the other thing, so when we're generating all this new electricity to charge these electric cars, these electric power plants will be giving off carbon, because we still have fossil fuel electricity power stations, don't we, Peter?
Well, their plans, these eco-fanatics, that includes the government, still, I would still call them eco-fanatics, their plans simply cannot work. We don't have and will not have the grid for it. The grid is absolutely crucial, and a massive, massive increase in consumption of electricity, it just cannot happen. It would require putting the country onto a war footing, abandoning the NHS, foreign policy, every education, and putting all that money towards building up the massive power grid. In the meanwhile, the fanatics say, "Oh well, we can bring it in by cable from other countries." Well, you can't. There are only two manufacturers in the world of this type of cable, and they're booked up until about the year 2050. It cannot happen. It's pie in the sky. It's totally unrealistic. But every step you take towards it is going to be painful for ordinary people. When they talk about massive investment in an expanded grid, what they mean is taxpayers' money.
Yes.
Not the capitalist money, our government money, our money for their virtue signaling with electric cars that won't even go very far anyway.
Yeah, and then there's also the issue with the lithium batteries. My concern for some time has been the mining of lithium from other countries, mainly poor countries, whether we're paying the correct amount of money for lithium, whether we're ripping them off, whether it's slave labour that we're going to be using to mine this lithium. And then when it comes to the end of the battery life, it can't be disposed of. It's very, very difficult to dispose of lithium. So these are all issues that I have personally around electric cars. This is not the panacea. This is not the answer to having cleaner air or less pollution in cities, as far as I'm concerned. What are your thoughts on that, Peter?
I wouldn't have one if you paid me. I'd be terrified it was going to self-combust in my garage and it would fry me. This is happening. This is happening. Some ferries do not allow electric cars on because of the fire risk. These lithium batteries are very combustible. You read of e-bikes exploding in people's garages. Well, cars do, and buses do. A bus depot in the southeast several months ago went up in flames because one of the batteries on one of the buses that was charging exploded. These are dangerous, which is why insurance costs are much higher with electric cars.
Okay, well, he's going to go on now to talk about heat pumps. So let's just hear what he says about these heat pumps.
Now, to get to net zero, we also need a fairer, better approach to decarbonising how we heat our homes. We're making huge advances in the technologies that we need to do that, like heat pumps. But we need a balance between incentivising businesses to innovate so heat pumps become even cheaper, more effective and more attractive, but without imposing costs on hard-pressed families at a time when technology is often still expensive and won't work in all homes. For a family living in a terraced house in Darlington, the upfront cost could be around £10,000. Now, even the most committed advocates of net zero must recognise that if our solution is to force people to pay that kind of money, support will collapse and will simply...
So, Peter, I don't know if you've heard about the energy bill that's currently making its way through the House at the moment. And there's lots of talk about these heating pumps in houses, and there is a clause in there at the moment that says that if people don't get one of these heating pumps installed in their house by a certain time, then they could be fined up to £15,000 and face jail. Let me hear your thoughts about the heating pump situation.
Yes, it's outrageous. By hook or by crook, they want to force people to have these wretched heat pumps, which are not very efficient. And it takes a whole day to heat a house where ordinary radiators take 5 minutes. And they're also vastly more expensive. But Sunak speaks with a forked tongue. He wants to have the benefit of appearing to relax the target, but meanwhile, his officials are ordering the companies that make gas heating, threatening them with a fine of £5,000 for each new gas boiler that they install, because they should be installing heat pumps. Now, a company can only afford such a fine if they pass the cost on to the consumer. So even though you have a theoretical choice still of having a gas boiler rather than a heat pump, the price will be £5,000 more than you expected. It is devious in the extreme of Sunak to go on pretending that he's actually making an important concession when his officials are clawing it back immediately.
And how energy efficient are these heat pumps? Because presumably they run on electric.
That's right. They claims are made. Claims are made. It's difficult to know, but the important thing is that they don't heat enough. They may be cheaper to run, but they simply don't get the house warm. So however much they are used, they will not raise the temperature of the house enough. You'll still be cold.
Yeah.
You'll still need to plug in an electric heater, which is vastly more expensive than having a gas boiler. It's not going to save, certainly not going to save money, on the contrary, and it's not going to save on electricity, and people are going to be cold and miserable.
Okay, let's just hear a little bit more.
Simply never get there. So I'm announcing today that we will give people far more time to make the necessary transition to heat pumps. We'll never force anyone to rip out their existing boiler and replace it with a heat pump. You'll only ever have to make the switch when you're replacing your boiler anyway, and even then, not until 2035.
So he's saying that we will have to have heat pumps at some point.
Yeah, he lied there. He said, you're not going to be forced. And then in the next breath, he said, after 2035, you'll have no choice.
Yeah.
Well, if that's not forcing you, the English language is clearly not his first language.
And to help those households for whom this will be the hardest, I'm introducing a new exemption today so that they will never have to switch at all. Now, this doesn't mean I'm any less committed to decarbonising our homes. Quite the opposite. But rather than banning boilers before people can afford the alternative, we're going to support them to make the switch. I'm announcing today that the boiler upgrade scheme, which gives people cash grants to replace their boiler, will be increased by 50% to £7,500. There are no strings attached, the money will never need to be repaid, and this is one of the most generous schemes of its kind in Europe.
Peter, what are your thoughts on what he's just said there? Because he's saying, oh, you know, we're going to give you £7,500. Well, if it's going to cost you between £10,000 and £15,000 to fit a heat pump into your house, then which is extremely more expensive than a gas boiler. We had to have a new gas boiler fitted in our house, which is a semi-detached. And I think we paid about £2,500 for a new gas boiler. So he's saying that, yeah, we'll give you £7,500 for a heat pump, but you're still going to have to find, you know, either £3,500 or more.
Well, I'd like to recall whose money is this? Is this Rishi Sunak, billionaire, going to give us this £7,500 or whatever? No, it's our own money, taxpayers' money. He's talking about. It's not government money; it's our money, paying ourselves. Almost every sentence he uttered there was misleading and devious. They're using our money to bribe us to have these heat pumps. And as I just mentioned, they're using other techniques. They're putting pressure on the companies to raise the price of gas boilers, so that in reality, your theoretical choice is just that, theoretical. You'll have to go with heat pumps because they might be a tiny bit less expensive than gas boilers, which will have had the price increased arbitrarily and unnecessarily. It's all smoke and mirrors. And in fact, some of the green fanatics, there's an outfit called the Green Alliance. Their executive director said the other day, folks, don't get over worried about what Sunak's offering. It's all smoke and mirrors anyway. Well, for once, he spoke the truth, this eco-fanatic. It's all smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, absolutely. So he goes on to talk about energy efficiency. Just want to tell the chat, if you've recently joined us, we're talking about net zero. We're talking about the Prime Minister's recent announcement into changing the net zero policies that they introduced some time ago. And he's trying to make out that we're going to get a better deal out of it. So we're questioning that today with Peter Ford. We're hoping that Piers Corbyn will be able to join us at some point. I know he's trying to connect at the moment, but I think he's having some technical difficulties. But in the meantime, if you have a question that you want to put to Peter, please put it in the chat and we'll come to it in about 10 minutes time. So keep talking, and if you can just highlight your question with a letter Q, so we can, it's easier for me to see, that would be great. And if you could put a like, if you could click the like button, that would be fantastic, because it helps to push our stream out into the algorithm, and it really helps because we are being beaten by censorship at the moment, and YouTube are not pushing our channel at all. We've been on air for over 3 years now, and we need to keep pushing our messages out there, and it really helps if you click the like button or you subscribe to our channel. Okay, so we're going to go on now where he talks about energy efficiency. So let's hear what he has to say about that.
And finally, we can't tackle climate change without protecting nature, and vice versa. Just the loss of forests alone accounts for the equivalent of 10 times the global emissions of the entire United Kingdom. And in the coming weeks, ahead of my attendance at COP28, I will set out the next stage in our ambitious environmental agenda. So in conclusion, this country is proud to be a world leader in reaching net zero by 2050. But we simply won't achieve it unless we change. We're now going to have a better, more honest debate about how we get there. We'll now have a more pragmatic, proportionate and realistic approach that eases the burdens on families, all while doubling down on the new green industries of the future. In a democracy, that's the only realistic path to net zero. Consent, not imposition. Honesty, not obfuscation.
Well, that's a lie right there, isn't it, Peter? You know, it's laughable. It's absolutely laughable.
It's about manufacturing consent.
Yes.
About manipulating and being devious about how they apply the pressure. He's clearly got the message that the present course is suicidal for any government, and the people they have to ease back, or appear to ease back on the throttle, because people are not all stupid. But it's all still in pursuit of the same end. He's pursuing the strategy of the boiling frog, the frog in the cup of tepid water, and they turn up the heat, and the frog doesn't realize it's being boiled alive. Well, that's us.
Yeah.
They're hoping to be more successfully devious about it, so we don't realize that we're being fleeced and forced into poverty.
Absolutely. Diana says, Sunak's thinking up scams for corporations to make dosh out of replacing stuff that works with new stuff that's useless. And Kira says, it's like he's reading a fairy tale. And Tig said, it's a disingenuous word salad. Totally agree with all of you in the chat.
Pragmatism, not ideology. That's how we'll turn the challenge of net zero into the greatest opportunity and the proudest achievement of our lifetimes. And this is just the start. What we begin today is bigger than any single policy or issue. We are going to change the way our politics works. We are going to make different decisions. We won't take the easy way out. There will be resistance, but we will meet it, because I am determined to change our country and build a better future for our children. Nothing less is acceptable.
Now, later on, somebody asks him, I don't know why my time tags that I put in are slightly different, but somebody asks him if there's going to be a referendum, and let's listen to his answer on that. Oh, hang on, it's gone back.
We ask to upgrade our grid infrastructure and speed up connections to it. So I think any which way you look at it, we're continuing to do the right things for business, whether it's investing in R&D to realize the benefits of innovation. Again, that's something we can do better than almost anyone. Speeding up grid connections, but most importantly, providing the certainty and clarity that we have a path that is sustainable because it's going to be done with people's consent. And I think that is something that they will prize above everything else.
But we haven't consented, Rishi.
Next, we go to GB News.
Prime Minister, you mentioned there the unacceptable costs on hard-pressed British families. How much will these changes save the average working family? And you talk about consent. Why not put net zero by 2050 to a referendum of the British people?
Well, when it comes to the costs, I think you're absolutely right to highlight them. And that's why I've taken the decision that I've taken, because some of the things that were being proposed would have cost typical families upwards of £5,000, £10,000, £15,000. Obviously, it depends on the type of property you live in, but for some people off the gas grid,
Oops, don't know what happened there. Just bear with me, I apologise for that. I was just trying to look at the chat and it's jumped off. Oh, Gaz, this isn't working out at the moment. Let me try it one more time. No, I think we'll leave that there. It keeps jumping back to the beginning, but basically, the reporter from GB News asks them if there's going to be a referendum, and Rishi Sunak laughs and he says, "No, of course not. I think we've had enough of them, don't you?" Obviously referring to Brexit. Unfortunately, I don't think Piers is going to be able to join us. He's having technical difficulties with his phone, Peter. So what do you think about his answer to the referendum? No, we've had enough of referendums. And yet all the way through his speech, he's talking about consent and democracy and all these weasel words.
Yes, well, what I find interesting is that he's not categorically ruling it out. He just, from the way you described it, just shrugged off the question, because he knows, it must be at the back of his mind, that ultimately it might be his last chance to retain power. If the Tories appear to be heading for certain defeat, he'll have to pull a rabbit out of the hat. And a referendum could be just that. I mean, we have to be realistic. The referendum is not going to happen on the Starmer.
Oh no, we'll come on to what Labour's response was to that speech in a second.
It will only happen if Sunak sees it as being in his interest to promise one and go into the election making an offer that Labour cannot match, which will be popular, like Brexit was popular. It won the Tories the election that got Boris Johnson eventually into power. They promised Brexit, and they were rewarded with power. This could happen with what I call Zexit, exit from net zero, Zexit. But what I liked about a word of praise, believe it or not, a word of praise for Sunak there, because of what he didn't say. What he didn't say was that it's all going to involve a lot of wonderful new green jobs. There's going to be massive investment. Workers are going to be given loads of new wonderful green jobs. This is what Starmer says. But quite significantly, I thought, Sunak didn't try to claim that these new technologies would create new jobs, because they won't. That is a real fairy tale. We had a concrete example of that 2 weeks ago with the announcement about a Tata Indian company investment in South Wales, a new car plant. They boasted that this would create, I think, 4,000 new jobs, and the government had only had to bribe the Indian company with, was it 200 million pounds of our money? What they didn't tell you was that 3,000 jobs were going to be cut. So that means that we, the taxpayer, would be paying 200 million pounds of our money to cut 3,000 jobs, just so that 4,000 new green jobs could be created. That is what green jobs means, decimating the present workforce for mythical gains. Mm-hmm. I think Sunak is preparing to attack Starmer on this front because he knows the truth. That's why he didn't make promises about new green jobs.
Gaz, can we tee up the Labour Party response, please?
Well, with me now is the Shadow Minister for Industry and Decarbonisation, Sarah Jones. Good to talk to you this morning. The Prime Minister has made it very clear what he thinks we should be doing in order to still meet our net zero commitments. Let's be clear about Labour's. If you're elected, would a Labour government move back the date for the banning of new petrol and diesel cars to what we thought it was until yesterday, 2030?
Yes. Look, the Prime Minister doesn't get it. He's weak. He gives in to Liz Truss as soon as she speaks. What he doesn't get is that net zero is the biggest economic opportunity we have in the 21st century. We live in a country where we talk about former industrial heartlands. This is our chance to get rid of that label, former, and to bring jobs across the country and to cut bills. So Labour has a plan that will create jobs and cut bills. We're going to insulate millions of homes, so we're paying less for our energy. We're going to introduce 8 gigafactories, which will turbocharge that electric vehicle industry so that we can make them here and not rely on them from other countries. We're going to set up a national wealth fund, which will invest alongside the private sector in all the industries that we need to see in the future. And we're going to have renewable, clean energy, which will make us stop being reliant on the likes of Putin for our energy. This is our one opportunity. Rishi Sunak has blown it. The government have blown it over 13 years. They haven't invested. The car industry has dropped in terms of employment by nearly 40% since 2010. The government has failed to negotiate with Europe. So there's a cliff edge coming on the 1st of January where the car industry is facing 10% tariffs on sales, which is just going to destroy our UK car industry if the government doesn't get a grip. So this is weak, it's wrong, and he has really thrown industry under the bus.
OK, so the Labour government would go back to the 2030 ban on diesel and petrol cars. What about the home installation rules, the dates for replacing boilers? Would they also go back to the dates that the government had set for before yesterday?
Look, when it comes to heat pumps, the government has utterly failed to get us anywhere close to being able to meet this target. And that's just an admission of guilt. from
But what would a
government.
Labour
They set the
government do?
targets.
Would
We know
you
that we are not
still
in a
tell
position-
people that they had to replace their boilers with heat pumps?
Not to those timescales, no. We know that the market is just not there on heat pumps. The government have failed. You need home insulation before you put in a heat pump. Home insulation has fallen by 90% since the government got into power. Labour would insulate people's homes, which would cut those bills. There is no market for heat pumps because the government hasn't created the incentives for one. And the grant system for these kind of things is all over the place. You just have to speak to anybody who's tried to apply for one. So that's an admission of failure. It's their failure. They.
Okay, Peter. What are your thoughts on Labour?
Well, a litany of lies and half truths. Just to take the first example that comes to mind, we need all this investment in new technology so we don't depend on Putin anymore. Well, that's a bald-faced lie. We never have imported
I know.
significant quantities of Russian gas or oil. Never. So that is a totally misleading statement. And then she was all over the shop. He wouldn't give a straight answer on what they would do about the target for gas boilers. And still to this day, even after a week, it's not clear what Labour would do in that regard. So if you value your gas boiler, the message is clear. Don't vote for Starmer. And then when she talks, I mean, who could object to insulation? Obviously sensible for an individual family. But who's going to pay for it? Us. Well, that's what Labour are saying. They're going to take more money off us, taxpayers, and give it back to us so we can afford insulation. What's the sense in that? Just leave people with their money in the first place. Labour, a few months ago, announced that they were going to create a £28 billion fund for all this, until Starmer realized this was a massive own goal, because people would realize that was their own money. That was taxpayers' money they were talking about. So they've watered that commitment down. But that is what is in store. They let the cat out of the bag, that we will be taxed. We're already taxed super heavily, but under Labour, taxes will be astronomical. It will be the most massive transfer of wealth since the 17th century.
Even worse than the pandemic?
Well,
that's a huge transfer of wealth.
Similar. It will be similar to that, but greater in scale and more long-lasting, because it's open-ended. At least there was an end to the COVID hysteria, but the climate hysteria just goes on and on and on.
Mm-hmm. Right, Peter, I've got a few questions for us. So from Diana, nice to see you tonight, Diana. We need planning that provides with the option travelling less and using public transport when we do not need to travel. That would save us dosh and lower emissions. I mean, when it comes to public transport, yes, I agree with you. However, my personal experience of public transport is we just don't have the infrastructure in place to begin with. You know, I live in a village. The town is it's about a 20 to 30 minute walk into the town centre, where I can then pick up a metro to get into Manchester town centre. But the bus service is terrible. It's absolutely awful. Peter, what would you say about the public transport?
It depends very much where you live. In London, it's perfectly feasible to live without a car. Maybe not in the suburbs, but in most of London, the public transport is really surprisingly excellent.
But the majority of the country is rural.
I'm sorry.
the majority of the country is pretty rural in comparison.
Yes,
you know.
Yes.
So,
It's not practical for the vast majority of the country, but I see that our viewer Diana is in favor of degrowth. Degrowth. That means we all get poorer, lower economic activity. I'm afraid what she's advocating here is similar to the 15-minute cities that we've been protesting about. The establishment want to corral us into these ghettos so that we don't move around very much, creating these disgusting emissions, and that we live in like a more feudal economy. Well, I don't think many people want that.
Alexandros, Diana, please, if you want to come back on that, I will read your comment. Alexandros, the biggest sales by far of electric vehicles are in China. This is largely thanks to government subsidies. In China, the same Tesla 3 that costs £44,000. Fun fact, Alexandros. Paul McCord asks, a question I'd like to ask is, why do the eco-fascists concentrate on demonizing CO2, which can be converted to oxygen and carbon via photosynthesis, instead of any other poisonous byproduct from fuel? I think that's a great question, Paul.
Yes, it goes to the heart of the matter, CO2. The core belief of the climate cultists is that CO2 is the thermostat on climate. Well, it isn't. It's a shame that Piers Corbyn isn't here to answer this comment. Piers is the real expert. But I can tell you what he would have said. It is that CO2, we need more of it, not less. CO2 is the gas of life. It's what makes things green, what makes things grow. And there is an association with warming, but it's not what they tell us it is. It's not CO2 that causes the warming. The CO2 levels rise after warming, as a consequence of warming, not as a cause. This is the core of the matter. And if serious scientists have made this point time and time again, but they are ignored because there is such massive vested interests now in masking the real science.
I think the point that needs to be made is that weather records or temperature records only began in the 1800s after the Little Ice Age. So, of course, when we've just been through a Little Ice Age, the world is going to warm up, isn't it? The climate is going to get warmer. So the question is, what were the temperatures before the Little Ice Age? So in actual fact, we haven't got global warming. We're just warming up after an ice age. I was listening to, I think it was Redacted last night. It's a news program on YouTube. It's a really good program, nightly politics program. And they were talking about this very subject. And they had a clip on from an Australian emeritus professor in geology, and he was saying that he was making this exact point, that there was a little ice age, so that when people say there's global warming, the question to ask is, when from? When are you talking from? What period in our world are you talking from? Because as far as he's concerned, you know, the world has been a lot hotter. I mean, in the time of the dinosaurs, CO2 was something like 2 million parts per whatever per 1,000 or something like that. Don't quote me on that. I need to look up the figures again, but it was huge. It was absolutely huge. And the world was very lush and very green. And if we reduce CO2 to zero, then our plants are going to die. We won't be able to farm. We'll have less growth in crops, and it's going to affect all of that, all our food and everything. CO2, as you said, Peter, CO2 is the gas of life. It's what we need to make plants grow, and nature is a fantastic thing. The more greenery we have, the more photosynthesis we have, and the plants and the trees will take out of the atmosphere all of this, the pollution. They will soak up the pollution and they will turn it into clean, fresh air for us. Let's see if there's any more comments before we wind up, Peter. There is no institution in the UK that hasn't been corporate captured. Absolutely agree with you there, Tiggs. We're too used to our governments working against us in favour of bribes from the rich to exploit next daughters. That the reasonable, decent, harmonious idea that Diana is talking about is scoffed at. Climate is always changing. We are carbon-based life forms. The carbon footprint, the criminally insane elitists squatting on top of the food chain want to eradicate ours. Absolutely agree. Well, thank you. Can I just ask our audience what they think about net zero? If you think we should have a referendum on net zero, can you put a 1 in the chat? If you are happy to go ahead with the net zero targets of 2050, then put a 2 in the chat. Let's just have a straw poll here of what people are thinking. So put a 1 in the chat if you want a referendum, and put a 2 in the chat if you want to continue with the government's targets. So Peter, whilst people are doing that in the chat, would you like to sort of wrap up our conversation this evening and what we should do?
Yes, well, you can't escape a discussion about the science. If the eco-fanatics have got it right, and CO2 is the menace, and it's the thermostat of the world, and if it's also true that human beings generate most of the CO2, then they would have a point. But it's all fairy tales. None of this is actually true. It is not supported by the serious science. I'm afraid that in the current debate, there's a refusal to deal with these basic points. Sunak, when he was presenting his concessions to common sense, was anxious to put distance between himself and people like me. So they don't even want to have a discussion about it. It's taboo to talk about the science, just as it was during the COVID hysteria. Taboo to make these points that the system of beliefs, they are religion. They owe more to religion. It's a cult more than it's a scientific belief. And therefore, when you're dealing with people like this, we have to resort to popular power. Now, referendums have their pros and cons. They're not always a good way to take decisions. But when the people are given no choice, when your only choice is green, greener, or greenest, or more lockdown, a little bit less lockdown, or a medium amount of lockdown, there is no choice. The democratic system is broken on all the key issues. There is no discussion about foreign policy, about the war in Ukraine. You can have war, more war, or most war. You can't have no war. None of the political parties are offering any choice on net zero, on Ukraine, or on healthcare. Therefore, we have to grab power if possible. And one way to do it is by a referendum.
Well, just having a look in the chat there, it's very mixed, to be honest. I thought we'd have a lot of ones in there, people wanting to have their say in this net zero issue. There's a couple of ones, there's a couple of twos, and other people saying neither, it's all misleading, it's masking the science, we need more debate, we need a socialist economy to deal with climate and environmental crises. So yeah, all very different. So I think really what we need to be doing is to be carrying on this debate. And if you're in the Workers' Party, then you can put motions to the members, the National Members Council. We've also got a Congress coming up in December. If you join up before the end of September, then you will be able to vote in the Congress and have your say on some of these issues. And I think maybe it's something where we do need to continue the debate, Peter. We need to talk about it more so that people can ask their questions and to fully understand what the issues are out there, and understand who's telling the truth and who is masking the science behind all of this. So I want to wrap things up now. I want to thank everybody in the audience that's participated this evening. I do appreciate you all in chat. Please share this broadcast. As I say, this is just the beginning of the debate. We can carry on talking about this, and hopefully Chris will be back with us next week for another production of Resistance TV. And as I say, I would like to thank you all for joining with us. Thank you so much, Peter, for spending the time with us this evening and giving us your opinions on this net zero discussion. So thank you all and good night.
Thank you.